Here's something that'll make you scratch your head. Back in the 1960s, there was a British saloon that outsold the Triumph 2000, competed directly with the Rover P6, and earned a reputation for build quality that rivaled anything coming out of Coventry. 37,000 of them found homes across Britain and the Commonwealth. Yet today, you'd be hard-pressed to find one at any classic car show from Brighton to Edinburgh. The Humber Sceptre didn't fade away because it was poorly built. It wasn't forgotten because it was unreliable or expensive to maintain. This was a car that represented something very specific about British motoring in the 1960s, a bridge between the conservative comfort of the 1950s and the performance-oriented market that was rapidly developing. It was a gentleman's express, a compact executive car before that term even existed. To understand what happened to the Humber Sceptre, you need to understand what Britain was like when it arrived in October 1963. Harold Macmillan had just resigned as Prime Minister. The Beatles were about to release I Want to Hold Your Hand, and the British motor industry was entering what many consider its golden age, a brief, shining moment before the mergers, strikes, and quality issues that would plague it in the 1970s. The Sceptre represented Humber's attempt to capture a very particular buyer, the professional man who wanted something more sporting than a standard Hillman Super Minx, but who wasn't quite ready for the raw performance of a Sunbeam Tiger. What they created was genuinely impressive. What happened next tells you everything about how the British motor industry lost its way. Topic 1. The Rootes Group gamble. The Humber Sceptre didn't appear out of nowhere. It was born from a carefully calculated strategy by the Rootes Group, one of Britain's big five motor manufacturers. By the early 1960s, William and Reginald Rootes had built an empire that included Hillman, Humber, Sunbeam, Singer, and Commer. But they faced a problem. How do you maximize profits while offering customers meaningful choice? Their solution was badge engineering, but done with considerably more care than what British Leyland would later attempt. The Sceptre was based on the Hillman Super Minx platform, but calling it a rebadged Hillman would be like calling a Bentley a rebadged Volkswagen. The engineering team, working from the Rootes plant in Ryton-on-Dunsmore, transformed the humble Super Minx into something genuinely distinctive. The engine told the whole story. Where the Super Minx made do with a 1,592 cubic centimetre four-cylinder producing 56 brake horsepower, the Sceptre received a thoroughly reworked version pushing 80 brake horsepower. This wasn't achieved through crude modifications. The engineers fitted twin Zenith carburetors, revised the camshaft profile, and increased the compression ratio to 8.5 to 1. The result was a car that could reach 87 miles per hour and sprint from standstill to 60 miles per hour in just under 17 seconds. Impressive figures for a compact saloon in 1963. But the Rootes Group invested in more than just power. The Sceptre received a completely redesigned interior that Motor Magazine described as executive class. Leather seats were standard, not optional. The dashboard featured proper instrumentation, including an oil pressure gauge and ammeter details that mattered to discerning buyers. Wilton carpet covered the floors. The doors closed with a satisfying thunk that spoke of proper panel gaps and sound deadening. The suspension received attention too. While the basic layout remained similar to the Super Minx, the engineers revised spring rates and fitted Armstrong telescopic shock absorbers at all four corners. The steering ratio was quickened, and the car received front disc brakes as standard equipment. The exterior gained chrome window surrounds, a distinctive front grille, and bumpers with proper overriders. Two-tone paint schemes gave the car visual presence without being vulgar. When the Sceptre Mark I launched in October 1963, the pricing reflected this careful positioning. At £958, it sat comfortably between the Super Minx at £749 and the far more expensive luxury saloons. A Ford Cortina GT cost £795, while a Triumph 2000 would set you back £1,096. Topic 2. Critical reception and market position. The motoring press of 1964 understood exactly what Rootes had created. When Motor tested a Sceptre in March 1964, their assessment was thorough and favorable. They praised the well-balanced road manners and noted that the handling represented a significant improvement over the standard Super Minx. The test car achieved 27.4 miles per gallon respectable economy for a car offering genuine performance. Motor's test revealed interesting performance details. Their car reached 60 miles per hour from standstill in 16.8 seconds, with the standing quarter mile covered in 20.1 seconds. Top speed was recorded at 87.3 miles per hour. These figures placed the Sceptre squarely in sporting saloon territory. Autocar's road test, published in November 1963, praised the comfortable ride combined with safe, predictable handling. They specifically mentioned the car's suitability for the professional man who covers substantial mileages. In class-conscious Britain of the 1960s, this recognition mattered. The test highlighted the car's refinement at 70 miles per hour. Conversation remained easy, and the leather seats received particular praise for long journey comfort. The Sceptre found its market immediately. Sales figures for 1964 showed approximately 4,000 units sold in the car's first full year. These weren't conquest sales from Jaguar or Rover. Instead, the Sceptre attracted buyers who might otherwise have chosen a well-equipped Ford Zodiac or Vauxhall Cresta. It also pulled customers up from the Hillman range, exactly what Rooties intended. The buyer profile was remarkably consistent. Typical Sceptre owners were professional men in their 40s or 50s, doctors, solicitors, accountants, senior managers. They wanted a car that reflected their status without being ostentatious. The Sceptre delivered exactly this. Production continued at Ryton with surprising consistency, with the factory producing approximately 80 to 100 Sceptres weekly. But the market was changing. By 1965, the Triumph 2000 was establishing itself as the default choice for upwardly mobile professionals. Rover's P6 offered technical sophistication the Sceptre couldn't match, and from Europe, Mercedes-Benz and BMW were beginning to make inroads with Germanic build quality and engineering prestige. Topic 3. Evolution and the Mark II. October 1965 brought the Sceptre Mark II, evidence that Rooties understood competitive pressure. The new model addressed the original car's weaknesses while maintaining its strengths. The most significant change sat under the bonnet. The engine grew to 1,725 cubic centimeters, producing 82 brake horsepower with improved torque characteristics. The larger engine wasn't simply bored out. Roots engineers increased both bore and stroke, taking dimensions to 81.5 millimeters by 82.5 millimeters. The compression ratio remained at 8.5 to 1, but revised twin Zenith carburetors improved fuel delivery. Maximum torque increased to 92 pounds-feet at 3,000 revolutions per minute, useful for overtaking and hill climbing. The styling received a comprehensive update. A new grille incorporated 4 headlamps, following industry trends. The front end was completely redesigned with a wider, more aggressive appearance. New rear light clusters and revised bumpers completed the transformation. These weren't superficial changes. Body panels were significantly different from the Mark I. The interior gained a redesigned dashboard with instruments grouped directly in front of the driver, rather than scattered across a broad panel. This improved legibility and gave a more driver-focused feel. Additional sound insulation reduced noise levels, and seats were redesigned with improved bolstering. Rooties addressed a key criticism: the column-mounted gear change. The Mark II offered a floor-mounted lever as standard, transforming the driving experience. The gear change was direct and precise, significantly enhancing the car's sporting credentials. Overdrive became available as an optional extra, costing £56. For motorway miles, this was worthwhile. With overdrive engaged, the Sceptre cruised at 70 miles per hour, with the engine at a relaxed 3,400 revolutions per minute. Motor Magazine tested an overdrive car and achieved 31 miles per gallon on steady motorway runs. The Mark II's base price rose to £1,087, still representing good value. A Triumph 2000 now cost £1,198, while a Rover 2000 commanded £1,264. Sales remained healthy through 1966 and 67, with the Sceptre establishing itself as a known quantity in the British market. Topic 4. The Chrysler Shadow. Behind the positive sales figures, the Rootes Group faced existential problems. By 1964, the company was already in financial difficulty. The decision to build a new factory at Linwood in Scotland, encouraged by government incentives but economically questionable, had drained resources. Competition from Ford and Vauxhall, backed by American parent companies, was intensifying. Chrysler Corporation began acquiring Rootes shares during 1964, initially taking a 30% stake. By 1967, Chrysler controlled the company completely. The family that built the business was sidelined. Decision-making came from Detroit, not Coventry, and American executives had very different ideas about running a motor company. The takeover had immediate implications for the Sceptre. American executives saw inefficiency in maintaining separate development programs for multiple brands. Why invest in unique engines and transmissions when sharing could cut costs? The careful badge engineering that created the Sceptre gave way to simple cosmetic changes. The Sceptre Mark III, introduced in October 1967, showed these priorities. It shared even more components with the Hillman Hunter. The body was essentially a Hunter with different grilles, trim, and interior. The twin carburetor engine remained, now producing 88 brake horsepower, but the interior no longer felt as special as the Mark I. The Mark III received improvements: all synchromesh transmission, servo-assisted brakes, revised suspension. Build quality initially remained good, but the fundamental character had changed. This was clearly a more expensive Hillman rather than a genuine Humber. Chrysler rationalized the dealer network. Humber had traditionally maintained separate showrooms in prestigious locations with premium service levels. Under Chrysler, Humber dealers increasingly sold Hillmans and Sunbeams alongside Sceptres. The exclusivity evaporated. Production figures tell the story. Between 1963 and 67, Rootes sold approximately 22,000 Sceptres across Mark I and II variants. Between 1967 and 76, they sold roughly 15,000 Mark III models. The decline was clear. By the early 70s, Chrysler UK was posting substantial losses, squeezed between volume manufacturers and increasingly popular European imports. Topic 5. The slow fade. The final years of Sceptre production coincided with the darkest period of British motor industry history. The 1970s brought strikes, quality problems, and collapsed consumer confidence. Chrysler UK struggled, requiring a government bailout by 1975. In 1978, Chrysler sold its entire European operation to Peugeot Citroën. The Sceptre soldiered on largely unchanged through these troubled years. A 1974 model was virtually identical to a 1967 car, save for safety equipment required by regulations. Black plastic bumpers replaced chrome, headrests became standard, the interior gained more plastic and less wood. Each change made the car less distinctive. When competitors like BMW introduced fuel injection and sophisticated suspension, the Sceptre's live rear axle and twin carburetors seemed antiquated. The BMW 3 Series, launched in 1975, offered overhead cam engines and build quality that made British cars look primitive. Even Ford's Granada offered more space, better equipment, and competitive pricing. Final year sales were sustained by fleet buyers and loyal customers replacing earlier models. New private buyers looked elsewhere. Why buy a Sceptre when a Ford Granada Ghia offered more car for similar money? Production ended quietly in 1976. No final edition, no commemorative model, no fanfare. The last Sceptres simply rolled off the line at Ryton, shipped to dealers, and sold to customers who probably didn't know they were buying the end of a line. Total production reached approximately 37,000 units. For context, Rover built over 327,000 P6 models, and Triumph manufactured over 318,000, 2,000 and 2,500 saloons. The Humber name disappeared shortly after. Chrysler saw no value in maintaining a premium mark that had lost prestige and market position. A brand that once competed with Jaguar and Bentley simply ceased to exist. Topic 6. The forgotten Humber. What happened next explains why you don't see Sceptres today. Unlike Jaguars or MGBs, the Sceptre never developed a strong enthusiast following during production. It was sensible, practical, well-built, but it didn't inspire passion. When these cars reached 10 or 15 years old, they became used cars, driven hard, maintained inadequately, and eventually scrapped when repair costs exceeded value. British scrappage rates in the 70s and 80s were brutal. Rust claimed many Sceptres' monocoque construction meant corrosion in sills or floor panels, rendered vehicles uneconomical to repair. Rear wheel arches were particularly vulnerable, along with front inner wings and flaws around seat mountings. Spare parts availability dried up as Chrysler UK became Peugeot Talbot and disappeared. Peugeot had no interest in supporting obsolete Humber models. Dealers scrapped part stocks. Without dedicated parts supply or enthusiast networks, keeping a Sceptre roadworthy became increasingly difficult. Engine parts could be sourced from Hillman Hunters, but body panels and interior trim were unobtainable. Today, the Humber Sceptre exists in automotive limbo, with no manufacturer heritage department and no corporate entity interested in preservation. The cars are on their own. The Humber Register estimates fewer than 200 Sceptres remain in Britain. Perhaps 50 are roadworthy. Compare this to the Triumph 2000, which maintains an active club with over 1,000 members and several hundred cars at shows annually. Values reflect this obscurity. A good Sceptre Mark II might fetch £8,000 to £12,000 at auction if you can find one. This compares to £15,000 to £25,000 for an equivalent Triumph 2000. The Sceptre isn't valueless, but it's undervalued relative to its quality and historical significance. The few enthusiasts who champion the Sceptre speak of excellent road manners, surprising reliability when properly maintained, and quality construction. The leather in a 1965 Sceptre exceeds what you'll find in many modern luxury cars. They're not wrong. But they're fighting an uphill battle against decades of indifference and the practical reality that parts are becoming impossible to find. So what happened to the Humber Sceptre? The simple answer is that it became a victim of circumstances beyond its control. The car itself was never the problem. Those 37,000 buyers got exactly what they paid for: a well-built, comfortable, reasonably quick saloon that served them faithfully for years. But the Sceptre arrived at precisely the wrong moment in British automotive history. It came from a company already struggling financially, absorbed by an American corporation with little understanding of the British market. It competed in a segment rapidly evolving toward greater sophistication, where German manufacturers were establishing dominance that continues today. Chrysler's cost-cutting and badge engineering killed whatever made the Sceptre special, turning it from a genuine Humber into merely an expensive Hillman. The Sceptre's disappearance tells us something about automotive preservation. We preserve cars that captured imaginations, Jaguars with racing heritage, Aston Martins with James Bond associations, MGs with affordable sports car appeal. We maintain cars so numerous they achieved immortality through volume minis, Cortinas, Beetles. But cars like the Sceptre, good cars simply doing their job without flash or drama, slip through history's cracks. The Sceptre represented genuine British craftsmanship and engineering competence from an era when British manufacturers could still compete on quality and refinement before the industrial chaos of the 70s destroyed that reputation. Those cars deserved better than to be forgotten. If you were fortunate enough to own a Sceptre back in the day, or if your father drove one, or if you remember seeing them on British roads, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. What was it like? How did it compare to whatever you drove before or after? Did it prove reliable? What happened to it in the end? These stories matter enormously because they're all that remain for most of these cars. If you found this exploration of a forgotten British classic interesting, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that like button if you'd like to see more stories about the cars that deserve better than history gave them. There are dozens of these stories waiting to be told, automobiles that served their owners well, that represented genuine engineering achievement, but never achieved the recognition they deserved. Thank you for watching, and remember, every classic car we see at shows today was once just transportation, doing its job day after day, year after year. The Humber Sceptre did that job exceptionally well, with quality and refinement that many more famous cars couldn't match. It deserved better than to vanish. Perhaps, with enough interest from enthusiasts, a few more can be saved before they disappear completely.